Hi guys, Jenica here from Multispective, and I'm here to share a new episode where I interview Lazou. She talks about a heart condition that she was born with and had a heart surgery which affected her self-image, her self-love, and the decisions that she took thereon out in relationships. She also talks about what it means to be Asian, born in Mauritius and raised in the US, and sort of the toll that took on her identity as well. Stay tuned. Hope you enjoy the episode. Don't forget to drop a comment below and check out the description of her podcast down below. Welcome to Multispective. I am so excited to have you here, and I cannot wait to share your story on air with our listeners today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, first off, thank you so much for having me. I am a multi-hyphenated person in all the ways. My actual name has multiple hyphens, and what I do in life has a lot of hyphens. I'm a singer, songwriter, producer, mixer, podcaster. I used to be a software engineer. Now I have moved over to the creative world, and I'm very happy with that decision.
Love it. No, that's so great. What made you decide to sort of pivot into this area?
I've always been a creative and also a nerd. That duality has been with me my entire life. I would stay up and read books, and then I would also love dancing and singing all day.
Wow.
So when I went to university, I did something practical. I got an engineering degree. I got a job, moved to Silicon Valley, worked there for 5 years. And after the 5 years, I was in a position where I realized that I could afford to take some time off and explore the creative side that I never got to explore because, I was busy trying to get into university and then get a job. But now that I was adult and that nobody was depending on me financially, it was the opportunity. My husband and I talked about it, and we both wanted to try doing something more creative that felt like the right time.
Yeah.
And it was very fulfilling to just make that shift.
You mentioned that you were in sort of a very technical field, even in Silicon Valley. So as far as, you'd gone as far as you guys, could see in terms of that success as well. Do you feel like it was partly the culture of being Asian that sort of made you go down that sort of path of like pushing yourself in that sort of direction? Or was that something you always wanted to do yourself?
Yes and no. So I grew up in Mauritius, which is a tiny island east of Madagascar, for people who don't know, in the Indian Ocean. So growing up there, it's such a tiny place. The currency exchange to any type of dollar is usually not great. Mm-hmm. And the idea that my parents would be spending their money on my education, I wanted to make sure that it was something that would have returns, And because I was interested in so many things, it wasn't hard to pick one of those interests that had a higher probability of, being financially rewarding. So yeah. I did enjoy my computer science degree. So it just kind of made sense. But also a little bit of the Asian influence you have the pressure of making sure that they would have enough money for my brother, who was a few years behind me, to be able to go study. And if I burn off all the money and he's coming behind and I'm not making money either, he's going to be stuck. So even though I kind of daydreamed of maybe getting a music degree, I just didn't think that was a realistic option. If you look at popular culture outside of Asia, you don't see people who look like me successful in music. You don't see, now you have BTS and K-pop is becoming popular. But before that, you never saw East Asian people. I knew that if I did want to do that and go all in, that it would be a huge risk. Whereas the computer science degree seemed like a pretty safe bet.
For sure. No, I can totally relate in that sense as well. I think that when we're young, we're always encouraged to pick a path that seems more achievable in a sense. So tell me a little bit about the music that you produce and the podcast that you're producing.
Yeah, so after I left my corporate job, I realized I needed to learn how to produce and mix my own music if I wanted to not have to pay somebody to do it every time. And so I just started learning by myself. I took some courses. I watched a lot of YouTube videos. And in relatively short time, I was able to learn to do the basics myself. I got some help in the areas that I was still learning. So now I got to the point where I can write, record, produce, mix everything in my own home studio, which I'm very proud of. I collaborate with a lot of other musicians on different projects. And then I also do my solo stuff, and I have a duo with my husband as well. So different genres of music, I will work with different people. I write in English and French and also Mauritian Creole.
Does your music or your podcast, is it inspired by your own life in any way? Do you use it as a creative outlet to, release some of the emotions from your own life and your own journey?
The music, yes, although not always. A lot of times I will get a request from a publisher saying, I need a song that has this lyrical theme that is more or less this genre.
Right.
For the podcast, I guess it was inspired by actually being in the music industry as an Asian person in the US and realizing that there's not that many of us. So when I met another Asian American woman in the music industry, we became friends and we were just talking about our experiences. And I realized that we had similar experiences that I didn't know were common for Asian people. Like I just thought they just happened to me, these were just weird things that happened. And she was like, no, that's the thing. Asian people get confused all the time.
Oh, like what were some of the things that you found? You were both confused.
Well, being confused with another Asian person was the biggest one for me. Like I'd never experienced that in Mauritius because Mauritius is primarily South Asian and then African descent. Chinese people are about 2%, but nobody would ever confuse me with another person unless we really did look alike. But in the US, I've had the experience where I had lunch with this woman and we talked about, she shared her life story with me. We had like a really great conversation at a conference. And then a few months later, we met at a different conference and she confused me with the one other Asian woman in the conference. It would be a different thing if we had just, hi, my name is blah, 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 and then we didn't talk. But we had a whole 2-hour lunch.
Yeah.
I don't understand how you confused me with another person who looks nothing like me. She wears glasses, I don't. She has short hair, I had long hair. Her fashion style is very different. It's like there's so many things that are different. Yeah. Our eye shapes are different. So I was very confused.
Yeah.
And my friend was like, yeah, I used to get confused all the time. And I was like, wow, really? That is a thing?
Yeah.
That was mind-blowing to me. And then the other thing that I would get a lot is I would meet people at a conference and they would say, what kind of music do you do? And I would tell them. And then they would say, oh, why don't you try making some K-pop or some anime music? And I'm like, not Korean, not Japanese, also like, what? Yeah. So, just those experiences. And that was around the time where anti-Asian sentiment in the US was at its highest after the pandemic. So that's when we decided to start the podcast. So my friend is not doing the podcast anymore, but we're still friends. It has transformed into being a space where the Asian diaspora comes together and we have conversations that are about our careers, our cultures, our communities. And a lot of the times, those conversations have been very healing for them, for me, for listeners. So that's why I do it.
Yeah. No, I absolutely love that. And I feel like with something like this, you're shedding light on, what it really means to be Asian. And I think it removes so many of the stereotypes and the stigmas around what that is like. And when you look at the way Western communities view us, and then you come into China or into Hong Kong or into Asia, and you actually view what really life is like, you really do see like a very different perspective on the world and on just cultures.
Yeah, because, I'm the only one of my family in the US. My entire family is still in Mauritius or in Canada. So I think, moving from Canada to the US itself was a culture shock. But also, I had grown up with friends from different religions in Mauritius. Some of my best friends studied in China, so they've told me what their experience was like in China.
Yeah.
And so it's so interesting to me. I think with the pandemic, that was when I started to understand how I am viewed as an Asian American. Like, I never thought about it before. But, seeing those stories, seeing like journalists who live 2 blocks from me getting harassed, getting spit on, and, just all the stuff that was happening, that was the first time that I was like, I don't feel very safe. In the US, you're always seen, if you're an Asian person, you're always seen as a foreigner, even if you were born here, even if your family's been here for 4 generations. People will ask you, where are you from?
Yeah, it's this weird thing. It's like people want to sort of find a sense of belonging. They want to be able to categorize and understand. It's like a way of making sense of the world. So they what they see is how they box you in. And so, you have the same issues with different races, with genders, with all kinds of identities. But it can be so limiting for an individual that's just trying to exist in a world. So, yeah, it's fascinating.
I have fun experiences when I go to any Chinatown and people, come up to me and they speak Chinese, and then I tell them that I don't speak Chinese, and you can see the disappointment on their face.
Right? Where does this story for you begin? Can you tell us right from the beginning?
Yeah, so we're not sure if I was born with it, but I was diagnosed when I was 2 with a heart murmur. And basically, if I understood correctly, there was a hole between 2 ventricles. And it started out, I think, at 9 millimeters, and it shrank over time. So when they first diagnosed it, they told my parents, you should have surgery. And typically when a child, an infant is diagnosed with that, they will have surgery, like open heart surgery on a baby. And then, they'll be fine. But I was the first child. My parents were in a new country. They were in Canada. They freaked out. They they were like, we're not sure we're ready to put our child through this huge surgery. So they went and got a second opinion. I think this might have been in Mauritius. And the second doctor said, oh, well, if you don't want to do the surgery now, you can wait. We'll just monitor her every 6 months, every year. And then a lot of times it will shrink as she grows up, but it won't go away entirely. So sooner or later, she might have to do that surgery. So my parents like, okay, great, no surgery. So I grew up going to cardiologists a lot, every 6 months, I think, when I was younger, and then every year. And everything was fine. I was growing up fine. I was a normal weight. The only thing was I couldn't participate in competitive sports. At least that's what the doctor said. And I was a very competitive kid. So anything you put me into, I was competing, even if it wasn't really a competition.
Yeah.
So instead, I started doing dance. My mom was like, well, at least you can't compete there. It's just you have to dance with everybody else in the class, right?
Yeah.
So that was fine. I got to the point where I was graduating high school. I left. I went to college. I still did my annual or every other year checkup. Everything was fine. And then one day I wake up And it was after an all-nighter. I had gone clubbing with friends. I was in my third year doing an internship at university. I wake up on a Sunday night and I can feel my heartbeat is not normal. So a regular heartbeat is like, right? My heart was like, like I literally could record it with my phone. Like
you could hear, like
you could hear it with just the phone microphone. I have a recording of it. It was so loud, and it sounded like fluid going somewhere. It was like, it was not the, you know.
Right.
So I was like, huh, that's not normal.
Were you experiencing like other things with this, like difficulty breathing, you know, anxiety,
No,
sweating? I don't know.
No, I just woke up and I had that. And I had been having a cough, like a really bad cough for like 6 weeks earlier. So I was like, okay, this is not normal. And then I got up to go to the bathroom and all of a sudden I started feeling lightheaded and I fainted for like maybe a few seconds. So it wasn't long. But I just like started feeling myself getting really heavy, and I woke up a few seconds later on the floor. And I didn't hit anything, you know, my head or anything, so that was good. So then I luckily was close to a hospital that has a cardiac center. I went there, and because it was Sunday night, it was mostly the younger people who were still studying at the hospital who were on duty that night.
Right.
And they were like, oh, it's probably, you know, because you've been having this cough or whatever, we'll give you some fluids, you can go home. So a few hours later, I go home. And then the next day I had to work. So I took the train, went to work, and I was starting to feel really out of breath easily. So I would walk maybe to the end of that room and I would feel out of breath. And so I left work early, and then I ended up having to go back to the hospital. And then they were like, oh, maybe it isn't just lack of fluids. Anyway, so this was Monday night. It took them until Thursday night to figure out what was going on. Did all kinds of tests. First, they thought I had swine flu. They gave me something for swine flu. It got worse. And then, you know, they're like, oh, I guess it's not swine flu. Maybe it's bronchitis. Maybe it's something else. Couldn't figure it out. Finally, on Thursday evening, the surgeon comes to see me and he says, so we have confirmed that it is that heart condition that you mentioned. And basically the hole that you had that had closed down quite a bit, well, it suddenly got bigger. And you need surgery, like tomorrow. And I was like,
or what would have happened if you...
And I was like, well, my parents are already on their way because they had already freaked out. And they were trying to figure out how they can get here as soon as possible. They were going to get here, I think, in like a day and a half. So I was like, my parents are on their way. Do you think I could wait till they're here? I think they would want to be here. He's like, no, you better not wait. I was like, okay, I guess we're doing this then.
Wow. But what did they say though? Like, what would have happened if you'd waited? What if you hadn't gone to the doctor that day? You didn't.
I could have died. Because I still don't quite understand all the technical things, but there was an aneurysm involved somewhere, and then the pressure in the chambers of the heart were all messed up. So like, if I waited longer, this could have caused permanent damage to the heart, and then if I waited too long, probably not a good idea. He was like, yeah, you can't wait. You need this surgery. There's no other way around it.
That is so scary. So you had to have an open heart surgery at this point.
Yeah. So that was Thursday afternoon. He came to see me in my room, and I was to have the operation Friday early afternoon. And so I was texting my parents. I'm like, can you send all the medical records? Because all my medical records were still in Mauritius because I don't know. I didn't have them on me. I was in the hospital. So my parents were scrambling. They were trying to find flights. They were trying to get visas.
Oh gosh, yeah.
So right before I went in, I was able to give them a copy of the last notes I had from the cardiologist. And they're like, oh, okay, that's really helpful. Now we know exactly what you've been having this since childhood.
Yeah.
So they had to call in a surgeon who does this operation on kids because, as I said earlier, usually they will do it on kids when they diagnose it in a child. And it's really rare for them to do it on an adult because usually they'll take care of it when you're a child. So I think there were two surgeons. One of them was a specialist in that operation on children, and the other was a regular cardiac surgeon. And a few days later, I left the hospital. And I remember when I left, my mom was like, do you want me to get you some turtlenecks to kind of, hide? Because it was like, so you can still see it here, but it was like bigger.
Much
and
bigger,
it was
right.
bloody and like,
Right.
Maybe a little scary for people to see. And so she was like, so do you want to wear turtlenecks for a while? And I remember having such a visceral reaction to that suggestion because I'm a very practical person in general. And I feel like if I was to hide it, then the longer I go hiding it, the longer it will take me to feel comfortable with it. And I just didn't want to have to deal with that. I feel like it's better to just rip the Band-Aid off and just start accepting it,
Yeah.
And I really despise the idea of having to hide something about me that I've gone through that was not a bad thing,
Yeah.
It was something that allowed me to live. It was something that has made my heart actually healthier after the surgery, after the recovery. Like, why should I be ashamed of having this scar on me when it wasn't anything to be ashamed about?
Yeah.
And I thought, maybe if I start walking around with my scar showing, it might inspire other people to do that too. So I said no to the turtleneck. No, thank you. I will wear whatever, clothes are in my closet. That is just fine. And honestly, I think my family was probably more uncomfortable about it than I was.
Did you ever ask your mom what was her reason for wanting to cover? Like, what was her reason for suggesting this so strongly? Was this her way of sort of like protecting you? Was it her assuming that you wanted it, or was it for some other reason, like for herself?
Yeah, she was protecting me. I think if it was her, she would have done that. And I know that in my family, when people have had surgeries like on their neck or anywhere that's visible, like they might wear a scarf or, they might cover their arm or whatever it is. Maybe it's cultural. I'm not sure. Yeah. And maybe it's also partly not wanting to make people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I know she was doing that out of love. Like, it wasn't like she was ashamed of it or anything.
Yeah.
But I have a very different personality. I do not like having to hide anything. I do not like having to put on a mask.
Yeah. I love that. And are you generally, would you say that you're very close to your parents in the sense that you're able to talk about your emotions and stuff quite openly with them?
We're Asian, so no. I mean, we're very close. We're very close. Right. But emotions is not something we talk about too much. I think with my mom, a little bit more. My dad, not so much. My dad is very stereotypical Chinese dad.
Right. Yeah. No, I love it. Like I totally understand. I feel like this is definitely one of those things that make us, uniquely Asians, because, emotions is one of those things where sometimes it can be a bit hard. I think we turn to our siblings and our friends for emotional conversations. We turn to our parents for like financial, intellectual, life related conversations more, right?
Yeah. And I don't know if it's generational thing, a cultural thing, a language thing. Because the other thing too is all the language we have around processing our emotions, around psychology, around all of that. I learned that in English. And even though I can translate it to Creole, it feels very awkward. And I don't know if you have this, you speak multiple languages. There are things that feel more comfortable to me to speak about in English.
Definitely. I think that there's certain words that exist in certain languages that don't in others. And emotions that are expressible in some languages and not in others. And so, if there is a word to express an emotion in that language, that emotion is more deeply felt in that culture as well.
But sometimes there is the word for it, but it's just that you've never seen it modeled as a conversation in that language. So I can translate it to Creole and not necessarily use technical terms in psychology or anything, but you can translate things and have conversations about emotions. But I've just never seen other people do that in Creole. Right. So it feels awkward because it's the first time you're hearing it and you're the first person doing it as far as you know. You know what I mean? Like, it's not necessarily a lack of vocabulary, although that is sometimes an issue, but it's also just you're not exposed to it in that language and it just feels very weird.
I see what you mean.
Yeah, and I feel like because it's something that is not often talked about, when you do talk about it, there's a lot more work, like emotional labor that you have to do to explain yourself. Because if it's something that a lot of people have been talking about, that it's in the public consciousness, then there's already an understanding that you can rely on, that you can build on.
How did you respond when people would ask you or would point it out, or did people point it out much, or were they consciously trying to avoid those kind of conversations?
Yeah, so it was interesting. In the first week or two where you could still see it was, kind of almost bloody, you could tell it was fresh. In the first week or two, I think when people did see it, I could see them look, and then they would not want to be caught looking. A couple of times people asked, what happened, and I would just tell them. To me, when people asked, I was happy to tell them. I said, I think it's good to destigmatize surgery, and I think also a lot of people are scared of surgery. I mean, understandably. For some reason, I was not. And I thought, maybe me being a young person who went through this huge surgery and being open to talk about it might help other people feel more comfortable if they have to go through a surgery and be like, it's going to be okay. It's not the end of your life. You don't have to freak out. Yeah. If I can make that a little easier for other people by talking about it, I'm happy to do that. Yeah. And it's very rare that people have brought it up.
No, that's really great. Credits to you for sort of being able to go through that. And, you had to, the hardest part is that sort of anticipation before getting into the room. And you did that on your own before your parents were able to make it. So were you able to sort of find yourself a little support group or friends or someone that was able to sort of be there with you at the very beginning of it?
I don't think I talked about it to anyone. It was just all in my head. I've always been in my head a lot. And I think the main thing for me was that there is nothing to be ashamed of. I didn't do anything wrong. In fact, this thing allowed me to be here. I felt like if I did cover up, then it would create that feeling of shame that I need to hide it, that I need to not let people see that I have this thing. And then I felt like it would invite more thoughts like I'm, broken or damaged.
For sure.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing as well is that, it can become as big a part of your identity as you decide or you choose to make it. So, if you were to go out of your way to consistently try to hide it, that it almost becomes that part of your identity, a part of the way you choose to dress, the way you choose to present yourself. the way you communicate with people. And if you're always consciously making that effort to hide it, then if at any point a conversation were to come up about it, your whole demeanor would be around the shame aspect of it. So I think that that concept of shame is something that is very important to talk about, and how shame plays a role in how we see ourselves as an individual. You know, it comes back down to that blaming of the self as well, that guilt that we experience. The more that we try to resist part of us that feels true, that feels authentic, the more it becomes stronger and more visible in a more negative kind of way.
Yeah. I mean, as you said, if you choose to hide it, then having to hide it guides how you interact with the world. It guides what outfits you can buy. It guides, you know, whether you are comfortable going to a pool party or going to, you know, on vacation with other people than your family. Subconsciously, it is shaping who you are.
Yeah.
Whereas I was just like, I'm just going to not think about it. Yeah. I'm just going to pretend it's not there and just live my life. And even though I'm not entirely comfortable with it, that, you know, it's not great to have a huge gash across your chest when you're 22. I'm going to admit.
Yeah.
But it is what it is. I can't get rid of it. And, you know, might as well start accepting that now. I needed to be okay with who I am to be able to move on. And it wasn't easy because I did wonder that, you know, I'm 22, I'm single. Is anybody going to find me attractive ever again? Because I have this large gash and 2 dots on my, you know, my abdomen. Yeah. So it was a struggle at the beginning in terms of not feeling like people would want to be with me. But I think what I didn't realize was what I was doing was embracing body neutrality before I had a term for that. And basically, the way I understand it for myself is your body is just a body. There is no requirement that it needs to be beautiful to be worth anything in this world. As a person, your value to this world is so much more than what you look like. Plus, we're all going to get old and wrinkly anyway, so why put so much weight on that and then have to grieve that later when you could just not care about it, and then life would be so much better.
That's so true.
And,
that is so
you know,
true.
I think I just focused on my interests. I focused on my career. I focused on just all the other things that make me who I am, and not so much physically what I looked like. And as a child growing up, I never saw myself represented in media because I did not grow up with any Chinese media at all. So I never saw anybody famous who looked like me. And all the magazines I had were from France, from the US, you know, all the TV shows. Everybody was white and all the pretty women were blonde and blue-eyed, and I really struggled with my body image as a child. And what I didn't realize was that after the surgery, when I shifted my mindset to, you know, let's not worry about what the body looks like. At least it's working. Let's focus on something else. We'll deal with it later, you know. Yeah. What I didn't realize was that in doing that, it also allowed me to let go of those feelings of not being enough, of not being beautiful enough, of not being worthy because of what I look like, of not, like not being white, being terrible.
Right.
You know? Yeah. So it was a unintended side benefit.
Yeah, no, I love that perspective. And it's interesting that you'd kind of been experiencing and struggling with that feeling for a while, but it took a surgery that left a very visible scar for you to sort of like overcome that entire feeling that you experienced. And at the end, I mean, you mentioned that you are married now, so you did find like love at the end. So can you walk me through how did that sort of happen, and how did your self-identity and your self-esteem, sort of confidence, come into play in that relationship?
Yeah. So as I said, after the surgery, I went back to a relationship that I shouldn't have. It was a terrible idea, ended very badly. I moved to the US. I entered another relationship that was not, I mean, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't great.
Walk me through, why do you say that these relationships, in what way were they bad, or how did they not work out for you?
The first one, it was very toxic, and I ended up getting cheated on, so that was very bad. The second one, and the only reason I went back to that relationship was because I thought nobody else would ever want me in that time. I think when you meet somebody who is a really good match for you, you realize just how much the other people you've been with were not a good match for you.
Yeah,
and that's what happened when I met my husband. Because we connected on so many different levels, like intellectually, creatively, artistically. We just had so many ways that we could relate to each other. We understood each other's language, we understood each other without even having to explain things. And when you meet somebody like that, it's almost like the physical aspect of the relationship is like secondary. Yeah, so I found somebody who is amazing and who I get along with great. And I'm very happily married. We've been together for almost 10 years. Yeah.
Lazou, can you give us a little final message to our listeners today, and some final plugins with regards to your podcast and the work that you do?
Yeah. Final message would be, you are more than your body. You are more than any one aspect of you, whether that's your job, your role in your family, your identity, your sexual orientation, whatever it is. You're more than any of those things. You're all those things combined. And if one of those things goes really haywire, it's fine. You'll survive. You don't need it. Also, a body doesn't need to be beautiful. A body is just a body. You don't have to care about being beautiful. You can if you want to, but you don't have to. And I have found that this mindset has been very freeing for me, to not feel like I have to be beautiful, because when you've grown up knowing that what you look like is not matching the standard of beauty wherever you're living, it's really hard to go from feeling like you're not pretty enough to loving yourself, like the body positivity movement that, people are like, love yourself and tell yourself you're beautiful. It's like, well, it's a little tricky. Instead, maybe as an intermediary step, you could say, well, I don't love it, but I don't hate it either. It's all right. It'll work. Yeah.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. And, at the end of the day, there's so much more I bring to the table than being a pretty face. So, and I'm sure whoever is listening, that is true for you as well.
I love it.
In terms of what I'm working on, I'm currently doing a limited series that is based in research, but that I'm trying to bring to a more broad audience. It's about queerness in pre-modern Asia, because on my podcast, Nuances podcast, I interviewed the Asian diaspora, and a lot of the queer people I've interviewed have said that they feel not quite part of the queer community because it's very white-centric, and not quite part of their Asian culture because it's homophobic and transphobic. And one time I was scrolling on TikTok and I saw a video about a play that was written in 1651 in China that had lesbian characters. 1651.
Wow.
And I was like, if that story's out there, there's got to be more. And why don't we know about those stories? So I decided to start looking around, and I found a lot of stuff. But a lot of it has been buried in history. A lot of it is not talked about. And I know that people would want to hear those stories. The people that I've talked to, that I've told these stories, they said, if I had those stories when I was a young person trying to navigate my queerness, this would have been really helpful. I would have felt seen. I would have felt like I was not the only one. So the series is a 9-part series, and I'm going through the history. Like, there's some really cool stuff. Like, the male emperors in China had male lovers. They were documented in history. Like, each of the history books had a chapter specifically for the male emperor's male lovers, like the favorite one. Also, there was a form of same-sex marriage in China for both men and women in different provinces in the later Qing dynasty. There's a god of same-sex love also in China, and that is known in some part of China. There's stories from Korea, Vietnam, Japan, India, Pakistan. Some of those stories from the male emperors even coined new terms in the Chinese language because they were so swoon-worthy stories that everybody, captured everybody's imagination at the time. So there's sexual diversity in Asia. There's a lot more of it than we know today. A lot of it has been buried. And I also go through why and how that happened, why it was erased.
Lazou, thank you so much for being on Multispective and sharing your story and, the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
If you enjoyed the episode and would like to help support the show, please follow and subscribe. You can rate and review your feedback on any of our platforms listed in the description. I'd like to recognize our guests who are vulnerable and open to share their life experiences with us. Thank you for showing us we're human. Also, a thank you to our team who worked so hard behind the scenes to make it happen.
Stefan Menzel.
The show would be nothing without you. I'm Jenica, host and writer of the show, and you're listening to Multispective.